We're nearly there. Thank you, everybody, for hanging in there. We've saved, I like to think, we've saved the best till last. I'm sure Gethyn will agree. Our final session of the day is with Gethyn Williams. Gethyn is a longtime friend of TeamKinetic, and he's been providing strategic and operational support services to charities and non-profit organisations for quite some time now. Today, though, he's here to discuss the Digital Toolkit, a project he's kindly led on behalf of TeamKinetic and in partnership with the AVM. So today is actually the first official look at the toolkit, its content and its structure, as well as some of the key learnings that we've had along the way, and some of the things that hopefully you guys as volunteer managers can take away. So, Gethyn, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Chris. Can you hear me okay? Am I coming through? Great. Always good to check settings. Hi, everyone. Thanks ever so much for still being here at the end of the day. I mean, Chris told me this was the headline slot. That's right, yeah? I think so. I think so. For those of you that failed to get your hands on Oasis tickets, congratulations, you're in luck. You've got the next best thing, something like that. As Chris said, we're here to show you a little bit of the digital in volunteering toolkit that we've been developing with TeamKinetic and actually with the Association of Volunteer Managers as well. Actually, over the last year or so, and I've talked about this a few times in TeamKinetic events and a few other forums as well. So just with a sort of show of reactions, just to test everything's working. If anybody's heard me talk about this before, can you sort of do a hand up, or or maybe an eye roll or something, if you can find that one, if that's more appropriate. A few of you, okay, great. So I don't want to repeat too much, but as Chris said, there is new stuff in here. We're planning to launch the toolkit in November. There are ways that you can be in the first queue to sort of see it and be there at the launch. We'll get to those at the end, and we are going to show you some of the content today. So I'll try not to repeat too much. So if you just bear with me, I'm going to share my screen and we'll go through some slides, and I'm going to talk through the 3 sections of the toolkit and pause after each, and you'll get to contribute, and we'll have a bit of a discussion about them as well. Not going to make you work too hard at the end of the day. I know it's been a long day, but a fulfilling one, I'm sure. Today, this session will be kind of quite light, so please do contribute, but feel free to contribute as much as you're able at this point. Right, if you'll just bear with me, I'm going to... Okay, got a thumbs up from Chris. Thank you for that. Never works quite as you intend it, does it? Lovely. All right, thank you. So, to recap, just as a sort of to set the scene or so, this is a toolkit about digital in volunteering. Crucial distinction, not just a toolkit that seeks to explain digital tools, digital approaches. This is a toolkit that leads with how to do digital well as a volunteer manager. And we felt that was a crucial distinction, because when we first started looking into this project and talking to volunteer managers about their experiences of using digital, there was, I suppose, quite a lot of, not necessarily confusion, but sort of a little bit of trepidation. I don't quite know what to adopt, don't quite know what's good for me. Occasionally it can feel like we are led by digital developments, the latest shiny thing or innovation that kind of comes along. So we wanted to try and put together a toolkit that helped volunteer managers to adopt digital on their own terms. That's the premise of this, essentially. As I said briefly in the intro, it's been developed a lot with Association of Volunteer Association of Volunteer Manager members, well done Gethyn, and others of that ilk in the field. And so a lot of what we've got in here is based on real world challenges, real world insights that volunteer managers go through. It's a resource that's been supported through TeamKinetic, but it's not one of these things that's all about TeamKinetic. We talk about quite a lot of different systems, different platforms, different approaches within the toolkit. And like I said, it's more about our approaches to digital than specific products per se. So what we're going to do today is have a bit of an exclusive first look at what's in the toolkit. It's definitely the first time that a lot of this content has been shared publicly. And actually, there are still some opportunities to shape this. We're still working on some of the final features. So I'm going to pause after each of the 3 sections, and we'll have a bit of a discussion for anybody that's interested. And at the end, like I said, you'll find out how to kind of get it first when it's launched and how to come to the launch as well. Okay, so here's a very quick overview of what's in the toolkit and kind of how it's structured. It's in 3 parts. This first one, Getting Digital Ready, is a foundational part, essentially. It's been designed for those who are maybe fairly new to thinking about how to use digital in their volunteering programs. So the purpose of this section really is to try and get you to a place as a volunteer manager or as a leader of volunteers where you can have a productive internal conversation with senior leaders and other colleagues about what you want to do with digital, or something external, perhaps with the developer. A lot of the managers that we talked to felt that perhaps they needed to do some learning or get some support before they felt confident to have a conversation with the digital developer and being able to kind of hold that on their own terms. So part 1 is very much about confidence to kind of get to that space, really. It's based on a series of foundational exercises, things like, you know, kind of how to do a basic user journey or a user experience mapping exercise. And like I said, it's designed to help volunteer managers become leaders of digital projects, digital developments in their own organizations. It's designed to work, this section particularly is designed to work as a whole. So there are 5 elements in it, and I'll show you those in a moment, but they all sort of support each other. Part 1 is the kind of thing that if you're looking for sort of foundational support in digital, you'll probably want to dip into all 5 elements because they sort of support and reinforce each other. And there's an element of self-serve guides in here and quite a lot of diagnostic tools to help you figure out what your digital issues are and where you might want to go with digital. That's what part 1 is about. It's for people perhaps newer to these discussions. Part 2 is quite practical, really. It's based around many of the common different aspects of digital as they are used in volunteering, a lot of current challenges. So this could have been an enormous section. We had quite a long list of things we could have talked about in terms of how volunteer managers are using digital right now. We've landed on 7 or so, and I'll talk you through those when we get to section 2. Unlike the first section, part 2 here is designed to be used sort of individually. It's a bit of a pick and mix menu. Not all of the elements are appropriate to all audiences. Some are aimed more at infrastructure organizations, for example. So you can very much dip in and out of kind of what you want. And it's based around step-by-step guides on how these kinds of tools and approaches are being used in digital right now. And then part 3 is very future focused. It's designed to help people develop their digital thinking, the big questions that we're all interested in that you can see listed here. So there'll be stuff around AI and volunteering, open data, air passports, everybody's favorite subject. I was talking about passports yesterday with a group of volunteer managers, and it's just as I left it. It doesn't seem to move on ever, but there you go. And we're also going to touch on this question of when digital isn't the most appropriate response to a challenge that we have in volunteering. So, you know, it's not for every situation. We acknowledge that as well. Most of these sections most of these elements, sorry, in part 3 are going to be probably audio resources. We think we're going to do them as kind of podcast length type episodes. We'll probably link them to the TeamKinetic podcast itself, which is great. Go and have a listen to that if you haven't already subscribed, but we'll link it through this toolkit. So we're probably not going to answer big questions here because a lot of this is quite new, but we'll explore the issues and we're going to try and help volunteer managers to approach these big questions in a way that's helpful for them. Okay, I don't know if there are any kind of initial reactions to the structure or whether we're happy to sort of move on to part 1, but perhaps I'll move straight on and then I'll take a pause on the sharing of the slides after each of these sections so that we can kind of have a look at them. So let's get into part 1 itself. Part 1 is about getting digital ready. It's about setting a direction of travel, really, for what you want to do with digital and building your motivation and confidence to get going. I suppose the outcome that we're looking for from section 1 is that you as the leader of volunteers and your wider organization feel well prepared for a digital journey, a digital development exercise. So it's a series of information and exercises to help you identify your needs, to help you diagnose issues, formulate a strategy, and start planning. And there are 5 elements, as you can see here in the 5 colored blocks. And like I said, they're sort of interrelated. They sort of prop up and support each other to some degree. By the end of this section, what we hope is that you'll be ready for either an early discussion with a software developer or a platform provider or any other external digital specialists or agencies that you might want to engage, as well as those internal conversations as well, if you're making a pitch for those sorts of things. So I'll go through these very briefly in turn, and then we'll pause for some reflections and questions. And I'd love to know what you think of these, whether we've landed on the right challenges, whether there's anything missing, that kind of thing. So this first one in yellow here, getting confident around digital. So the thing that came through so often as we were talking to volunteer managers initially, as you can imagine, their big question, or their first question, was something around how to choose a digital platform, how to choose a volunteer management software. We've all been through versions of this pain ourselves, I'm sure, at some times. So what we've done is we've used choosing a volunteering platform, a volunteer management software platform, as a bit of a proxy or a Trojan horse for figuring out what you might want from your digital developments. And what we've done is put together a checklist of kind of key typical features of volunteer management software platforms. And we've used that to help managers select what they really want from digital and what they don't do. And if you've ever done a digital project and you've used the MOSCO acronym, the must have, should have, could have, won't have, we've wrapped that in as well. So there's a template that you can go through here to give you a menu of options and help you figure out whether they are essential or whether they are things that you kind of don't need. And this is the first stages, we think, of developing a good vision for digital on your terms, and avoiding that feeling of being drawn by the latest development in digital just for the sake of it being new. Developing the vision itself in green here. This is the part where we really introduce the sort of main taxonomy that we use across this toolkit. What we've done is looked at where digital is used in kind of other areas of business, other areas of society, and we've landed on this notion that digital tends to get used around three key objectives. The first one is scale, the second one is efficiency, and the third one is experience. And so you'll hear us referring, and you'll see us referring to scale, efficiency, and experience throughout this toolkit. These are ways in which we think digital can be applied. So scale clearly is about growing our program. A lot of it's about marketing and reaching new audiences of volunteers. It's about growth. Scale is about growth. Efficiency is something that applies to us as organizations. It's about running our systems and processes better. It might be about reducing duplication in the volunteer journey, or cutting out unnecessary stages for ourselves. But it's an objective that's focused on our own needs as volunteer involving organizations. And then finally, experience, as is probably fairly evident, is about the experience for volunteers. It's about improving the experience for them. So throughout this toolkit, we talk about scale, efficiency, and experience, and we use those as lenses through which digital can play a role. And that's what this section is about outlining, essentially. Understanding the volunteer user journey in blue is something that probably many of us have done before. It's a basic user journey exercise, a simple Excel or Google Sheets based template, which helps you understand all of the different stages of your volunteer's journey, all of the different points of interaction that you have with volunteers, or they have with you and your organization en route. And it's used to help identify or diagnose issues on that journey, really. So many of us have done versions of this before, but we thought it'd be helpful to include a quick and easy entry point for those maybe that haven't. Pitching for investment in red is a really interesting one, I think. In talking to volunteer managers, we realised that in trying to convince different stakeholders that investment in digital for their volunteering program was worthwhile, they ended up needing to use quite different arguments to different audiences. So in talking to senior managers or directors in their organization, I want to do this, I think we need to go on this journey, we need to explore this. They were often having to talk about their volunteering program or justify this business case in terms of the organization's strategy. How is it helping us meet our wider goals? The immediate goals of the volunteering program might not be the same for senior managers. So how do you do that? How do you relate it to your organizational strategy? We'll cover some of that. Likewise, we noticed, or we heard rather, that trustees were focused on slightly different things. So if you found yourself in front of a trustee board, you may find yourself talking about your volunteering program in terms of helping to manage risks for the organization, or ensure compliance with certain statutory objectives. So a slightly different argument for trustees again. And then funders, they tend to be more interested in either the impact of the program or giving them the confidence that you as an organization can take on a digital project like this and deliver it successfully. So there are different cases to make when you're pitching for investment, and this red section will kind of help you through some of that. And then finally here, final thing before we break, is to map out the organizational journey a little bit. So having done some of these previous exercises, having gained an idea of the user journey, having developed a bit of a vision, having thought about the key elements you might want from digital tools and approaches, and thought about the different arguments that you might make for different audiences, how do you pull all of this together into a bit of a plan? And fortunately, there's loads of great advice from experts and leaders in volunteering out there. And we've summarized quite a lot of this about how that digital piece is really put together and how to refer back to the other elements in this section to help you make that question. So that's it for part one. I might stop sharing there so that we can see each other. And then if anybody wants to kind of quick chat about those, that would be absolutely great. I've got some kind of questions to ask you, essentially. So we're back in the room. I don't know whether people can automatically say anything, or whether we need to kind of like let them in. But I'd love to know, what do you think about this section? Does any of it particularly appeal? Does it answer questions that you have already? Or what doesn't feel as valuable and what's missing? Would anybody like to share a reflection or even talk about any of those challenges as they see them? Pop your hands up if you want to kind of contribute. Stunned silence, Chris. That's either really good or really bad in my experience.
I see people typing at it. So.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Stephen. By all means, type if you prefer. We'll put it in the chat. I'll bring that up now. Okay.
I guess is there anybody here on the call? Because I know we've got a number of our customers, but there's people who are thinking, I think, about their next step in terms of maybe a VMS or some way of engaging more digitally with their volunteers. Anybody at that stage at the moment? I know there's one or two that I've spoken to that any of that resonates with that they've seen so far in terms of. Hi, Mark. If you're happy to say hello to everybody.
Hi, Mark. Thank you.
Hi, just bring the microphone down, not being a presenter, better be heard. Yeah, we're in the process of considering moving from a very old, very old VMS, and I can see this being a real boon because certainly we're in an organisation where the volunteer side of things stands slightly alone. So it doesn't have the resources itself. It's not like an organisation that I can go to the IT department and say, put me in a VMS, will you? And so a lot of it is you have to go forearmed. And I think that looks like a very useful suite of tools to take you from the very beginning all the way through to the point where you can make a pitch for money as well. So yeah, I think it looks fantastic. So I've already signed up for the thing that came out earlier. So you say you put your name and address down. So yeah, I'm already in for that. So yeah, I'm keen to see all of it go through really.
I would say, has anybody just come out the other side of it? Because that's also quite interesting to get your thoughts that someone's just been through that pain as to.
I mean, I can see one person, Chris, on the call that I know has been through that recently, but I'm not going to pick on him. I'm going to let him pick on himself if he needs to.
Yeah, if anyone wants to sort of share that what that journey and what they've learned going through that journey of building that business case and finding out what's out there and looking at all the different products and maybe sharing how difficult that can be and how time consuming it can be.
Keith, I can see that your microphone is open.
Go on then. All right.
I don't know if you might say a few words about this. Sorry. Yeah, go on. You've muted again. You've muted yourself. Sorry, Keith.
Oh, you don't want to hear that anyway. It's interesting actually because I kind of what you've come up with is quite similar to the process. I literally put together a presentation based on I've kind of worked it backwards. What do we need? What are we doing now? What does the business need? Where are our business objectives? Kind of lined it up with the practicalities right now of what our program was involved with and where the flaws were, if you like, and And then the hardest bit, actually, even we're lucky enough to be involved in active kindness over the last 12 to 18 months, and speak to a number of people about what systems they were using. And it was quite interesting because the feedback was kind of, we went down a different route, to be fair, compared to the feedback that we were getting at the time. But we looked at 3-4 different systems and checked the boxes based on what we needed and what we felt we needed. Flexibility, transparency, able to build it from the ground up and it be our own, and you own it almost. And yeah, and there's been a lot of learning along the way, and I have to say, from my perspective, still learning, because there's all sorts of things that flag up every time I add things that, oh, I need it to do this now, and it's not quite doing what I need it to do. But I think we're on that road now because of updates, changes, moves, and I think everyone's needs change all the time, don't they? And that's the problem.
Yeah. It's not a static picture, is it? That's
keeping it fluid. But so going through that structure though was very useful, and it enabled us to go down a checklist and make a clear decision, and then implement. And then the hardest thing with the implementation is not really been the initial work, although it can be a little bit repetitive, can't it? But actually, it's bringing the wider business into it.
Okay.
We talked a lot earlier on about mentors, providers, and I think the only way this works is buy-in, and buy-in from your existing volunteers to get them to enroll and enlist on a brand new system. And if you've got a good proportion of volunteers that are 50 to 85 years old, you're going to have some issues with that, because we are and still are.
Sure.
And if you, so what we're in a process of, even down the road now, is all new volunteers enroll on the new system. Great. And we're running a manual system which we're feeding in, and but I really want the existing volunteer base to feed themselves into the volunteer management system.
Yeah.
Because whilst I can manually add, I want them to see that it's not painful. Yes. And I want them to do it. So it's naturally, it will take longer. And that's just life, isn't it? And we've taken a view that actually long-term plan here is that we'll integrate everyone, and it'll take as long as it takes. That what it does do is skew data a little bit.
No, sure.
What we've already started to see, though, when you start to examine and data points, hours, voluntary positions, people who interact, people like to go on the system, your staff that go and check on the system, you know that, oh yeah, I was on there the other day, and yeah, I was having troubles, and turns out they weren't on there at all.
No.
You can see when they've logged in last time. It's great.
That has touched on for a few people as well. Engaging mainly older volunteers, referring back to sort of Gethyn's approach. If that is a consideration and that is a worry, that's a risk factor, that's the kind of thing that needs to be in that approach at the start. When you start thinking about the scope of the product you want to get. Is it something that we can do with volunteers shoulder to shoulder? Is it something we can do for volunteers if they need us to do it? Is it a system that is inclusive, or is it a system that is purely digital? That's one of those Moscow elements. If it needs to be inclusive, then you need to see that in the product that you purchase.
It is absolutely. Thank you, Keith. That's a really helpful contribution, and absolutely, it's not all about functionality, is it? It's about what you can get your system, get your volunteers and your wider colleagues to use. That's
100%. And just the one thing that I think it was touched on earlier on, but I think it's a really valuable point, is you can't do it all in the first phase of implementation and usage. There's so much functionality on the system that I think, oh, I'd like to do that and I'd like to do this. But actually, you can break it down. You can break it down to registrations, getting providers to start to get them to add opportunities on there, and so you can start focusing on widening your reach, widening what it looks like, widening your opportunities, developing your identity, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And there are things that I've tasked now, right? You're now taking ownership, which is great. What's it look like? What's it feel like? Because I feel like there's no point going down an app route just yet, because there's no personality within it.
Okay.
And the scope there to do it, we can add We can add images and we can do all that stuff, but I want the providers to do that locally. I want it to feel.
Going to pass on to Debbie because she's got a hand up. Keith, thank you, though.
Yes, I'll shut up now.
Hi, Debbie. Thank you. What would you like to talk about?
You're on mute, Debbie. You're on mute. Gets everybody.
Yeah, it gets us every time, doesn't it? I just really wanted to reiterate exactly what Keith said. And we had an awful lot of issues because we have quite a lot of elderly volunteers and they just did not buy into it at all. And what we found really worked, and it did take a long time, and we've literally only come out of the other side, and it was introduced just before I started at Mean Park, which was August 22. It was introduced in June 22. We found training and more training, whether it be one-to-one, whether it be group training, whether it be training or at an actual opportunity. Everything was really, really difficult.
Okay.
And one of the really strange things, and it just sort of came to me, was those that were using the app, a lot of the complaints, I can't see anything, I don't know what it's saying. And suddenly I had an epiphany. And because a lot of them were elderly and they have poor eyesight, a lot of it was down to their settings on their font was so large.
Okay.
And once you reduced it back down, it was like, oh my gosh, there it is.
I see.
So, yeah, so it was something.
Feedback. Thank you for that.
That's a brilliant real-world insight, Debbie.
It was absolutely, yeah. And funny enough, I only recognised it because I had the same issue with my local gym membership, and I couldn't see it. And I realised it's the font. When you wear glasses, you can't necessarily see everything that's presented to you. So that's something, like you say, real world experience, but also lots of training. And trying to explain to them that we get a bit of our funding from the National Lottery, and we're trying to explain to them that not only is it about them helping us manage their time, but also the fact that we can demonstrate to the National Lottery or the Heritage Fund that we're actually doing what we're saying we're doing, and can we have some more money, and look, and here are the hours that we're getting our volunteers to do.
The alignment of asking the volunteer to do a little bit more, with the reasons why you want them to do a little bit more, rather than they just think it's just because you're asking them to do more, is a really key part of that change management. So having the volunteer understand the value of what they're doing and why they're doing it, rather than just being another thing you've asked them to do, is key in that communication piece when you do this work, because people get very annoyed very quickly if they just think that you're making them jump through 2 hoops rather than 1 hoop to do the thing they're already doing. So it's and I was speaking about this just last week, that communication piece to explain why it's important. And it's easier to do that when you're in a more formal setting. The more informal it is, the more tricky that is, because the volunteers have been used to doing it without doing anything. So that is definitely a key part of that onboarding process for volunteers, and certainly all the volunteers that don't want to do it anyway.
Lovely. Thank you. Before we go on to section 2, I'd love maybe in the chat, quick sort of reaction really to that structural idea that we have about scale, efficiency, and volunteer experience. When people in the room think about where they use digital in their programs, do any of those stand out for you more than others? Are you thinking about using digital to grow program, make your stuff more efficient, or improve the volunteer experience? Do any of those feel more important than the others? If you could just say maybe scale, efficiency, or experience in the chat, or something like that. If anybody wants to talk about it, we probably do have time, but I'd love to know. Experience, people first. Thanks, Ali. Yeah, interesting. I mean, it's interesting that the balance of the comment that we had felt like it was about the volunteers and making it work for them rather than our problems or simply growth. Interesting. If you have a reflection on that, please do put it in the chat. It might tell us something interesting about the balance that we need to strike in this toolkit. Okay. If we're ready, I'll move on to the second part. Fairly similar, similar sort of idea, and then we'll stop for kind of a quick chat on whatever feels relevant. So if I just do, bear with me, need to remember how to do this now. There we go. And then play from current slide. Okay, so you should hopefully be seeing part 2. I can't see anyone's face, so if you can't, somebody come off microphone and tell me. But otherwise, I'll go on and explain what this section is all about. Thanks. Oh, thanks, Chris. That's great. So Part one was quite foundational and kind of preparing us for a journey, and perhaps for people that were sort of new to some of these, or newer to some of these issues, or at the start of a project, crucially. Part two focuses more on the key themes that are current now in volunteer engagement, where digital is most commonly used. So hopefully many of these headings that you'll see here look kind of like fairly familiar. Like section one, it's all based on things that we've heard from volunteer managers. This is what we think is important right now. But unlike section one, the 7 different elements that you can see here are designed to be used almost as sort of standalone entities. They're different aspects of digital adoption. Some of them are particular to different audiences. So the guidance in this section is really start wherever feels most appropriate for you. You don't need to feel the need to kind of complete the whole of part two, if you like. You can kind of pick and mix what feels most relevant. So there are 7 here. I'll go around them all pretty briefly, and then we'll stop for a bit of a chat as well. So we're going sort of top left over to the right, and then back along the bottom line, finishing on digital for infrastructure. The first one in yellow here, marketing and communications, fairly obvious place to start, really, I suppose. Many volunteer managers are already using digital tools to help market their program, which is normally about scale and growth. But also, of course, to communicate with volunteers, and that's about, I guess, their experience. And actually, we've just been talking about the importance of regular communication with volunteers and getting the point across of why we do these things or why we have these developments. So it's examples led. What tools are being used right now, and there's a focus on no cost or low cost tools. So we're not suggesting anything that's proportionately expensive here. I know many volunteer managers that use lots of free tools, even if it's just Google Forms or those kinds of approaches, and we focus on real world examples of where those have been used. Inclusion and accessibility is, of course, a massive current issue for many of us in volunteering and many volunteer managers. We decided here that one of the most useful things we could do would probably be to summarize what we know about these issues now. What do we know about inclusion issues in terms of how they relate to volunteering and where digital can play a role, and kind of access crucially as well. And possibly 2 sides of the same coin, inclusion and accessibility, but used differently in digital settings. We've taken quite a lot here from NCVO's Time Well Spent report, which tells us a lot about the volunteer experience, and we sort of pulled out what's really crucial about digital there. And we've drawn quite heavily on the vision for volunteering as well, which has an awful lot to say about our practice in these areas. And then we've sort of built from there to think about where digital can play a role. The third one in green, top right, connectivity and interoperability, which again feels very current to me. We've all got slightly different platforms and systems and kind of combinations of digital tools that we want to use, but they don't always connect up with each other, do they? And if anyone took part in the Big Help Out this year, you might have a bit of an instinct for where we're going with this connectivity and interoperability. How do we work in volunteering in a world where everybody wants to use their old platform or their own approaches, and we don't want to duplicate too much, but we can still connect up the volunteering ecosystem so that, you know, new prospective volunteers can find us quickly and easily, or move between different platforms kind of seamlessly. So this is partly about efficiencies for us as organizations. How do we get to use the platforms that we want without having to duplicate ourselves and repeat our offer or our volunteer roles endlessly on other people's platforms? And it's partly about the experience for volunteers as well, about getting to us kind of quickly and easily. And we use the Big Help Out as a bit of a case study here to explore issues like APIs and webhooks and other bits of code that help us connect up our websites. I think this one's kind of about future-proofing as well, in a way, because it means that we still get choice and flexibility over the systems that we choose for ourselves, whether it's TeamKinetic or any others. But we can still live in a world where they can connect with others when and where they need to. It feels very current. The yellow at the bottom, task allocation on the right-hand side. So this is a bit of a dive into systems that allow volunteers to self-select the tasks they take on. So this is essentially recognizing some of the different digital developments that we've seen in this area since programs like the NHS Volunteer Responders came along during COVID. where roles tended to be broken down more into time-based tasks, and volunteers can sort of self-match, self-broker, self-select some of those, growing in popularity. In this section, we'll look at how some of those systems work, what types of volunteering and volunteers they really work for or they're suitable for, because it doesn't feel like it's everyone, and how different organizations have, you know, taken that kind of approach and run with it, either to reinvent their program or give their volunteers a bit more option and flexibility. So it's how digital serves that kind of purpose. If you're interested in exploring that, hopefully this will be a useful sort of entry point to some of those questions. Recognition and reward, you know, essential elements of any good retention strategy, and digital can certainly play a role in here. Pretty straightforward, this one. We're looking mainly at some of the off-the-shelf systems for reward programs that are out there. We're looking at Tempo, particularly, if you've come across that, which is something that can serve as a rewards program and can be bolted on to many people's individual programs. But we're going to use that as a bit of an illustration as to what more can be done. So digital in reward particularly, but as part of a retention strategy. Nearly there now. The compliance piece in red recognizes, and this links back in a way to issues that volunteer managers raised when talking to trustees about their program, and how a lot of those conversations tend to be focused on risk. So we've looked at the three main elements of compliance that tend to come up regularly in volunteering, those being safeguarding, health and safety, and GDPR. And we've looked at where digital can help volunteer managers to manage those areas of compliance and those risks well. Some of that's fairly obvious, and it's probably in your heads. You know, I've got training that needs to be regularly updated. How do I keep on top of when that needs to happen? I've got reporting I need to do for the board or others in these areas. What kind of tools can I use for that? So it's a very practical element focused on compliance. And then finally, digital for infrastructure. So by infrastructure here, we're talking about membership bodies, perhaps local infrastructure organizations, CVSs, volunteer centers, people of that ilk, or even national organizations with local federated branches or chapters or bodies or whatever we call them. All of whom kind of collaborate with the front line on volunteering in some way. We've noticed that their needs might be slightly different in digital to some of those frontline organizations, but how are they using digital to advance volunteering and kind of connect with their partners, with their members, with their clients, however you might want to call them. And again, we've thought about that in terms of scale, efficiency, and experience, and kind of where that really helps. So it's a shame I can't leave this on the screen and sort of see you all, actually. We're going to stop sharing at that point, but it'd be great to get some similar reflections to the first section on this, really. I'd love to know, what do you like about it? What appeals? What would help you right now? What doesn't feel as valuable? And what's missing too, which feels crucial for this section. As I said, there was almost too many areas of digital that we could have dealt with here. We've landed on these 7. Are they the right ones? Are we missing anything massive? I'd love to hear your thoughts. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and maybe we'll kind of come back. I'll have a quick look on the chat. Oh, thank you. Got some thumbs up there. Would anybody feel brave enough to kind of go and say something about that? Put your hand up if so. I'd love to know what feels useful and what doesn't, essentially. I'm having a quick look in the chat while we kind of do this. Okay, link to Tempo. Yes, if you haven't seen Tempo, that's worth checking out, certainly. We're getting to that part of the day where people have to go and pick up kids and stuff, aren't we? That's yeah, that's the nodding. Ali asks, how can Tempo volunteer time credits navigate a notion of incentivizing volunteering? I mean, I think stay tuned for the toolkit is the answer to that, Ali. We're about to find out. I'm meeting them next week to kind of get a walk through the user journey as you, the volunteer manager, would kind of have it. Chris, you've looked at this a little bit though. Do you have anything you can help us reflect on?
I mean, it's a debate as old as time as to where reward rather than recognition plays a part in the volunteer experience, and there is very entrenched beliefs and feelings on both sides of that debate. I think that what Tempo does offer, which I like, is it looks to build a circular economy in the communities where people are volunteering. So it comes from that original time banking concept, which is local services being offered to people volunteering in their local areas. it does have obviously an offer that is slightly larger. It is quite a large organisation now, but it really does try and create those network of recognition partners in the localities where the volunteering is taking place. So in that respect, I do like the link, but I do also appreciate there is a inherent risk when you commodify volunteering, if you will, for lack of a better description. So I think these things can be used if they're used appropriately and they're promoted in the right way to help people that maybe wouldn't access opportunities, access things that they wouldn't, and extend people's life opportunities. I can't see that's a bad thing. If they become dependent upon for the volunteering to take place, you must have the reward scheme, then that's probably a negative. And trying to find the happy medium in that space is probably where we want to be. So I'll fudge the answer. Sorry about that.
No. It's very relevant, and I'm gonna come to you in just a second, Keith. But I remember thinking about this when working with Keith and colleagues in the leisure sector last year, and I think the conclusion that I came to was that rewards can be seen by volunteers as quite a positive thing in areas where you're quite consciously asking them to give up their time for something, or they're making a choice about how they spend their time in volunteering with you alongside other leisure activities. In the leisure sector, this was relevant because many volunteers were users of those leisure services as well. So a time-based reward felt appropriate for the way that they were using their time as volunteers. Keith, I don't know whether you'd agree with that or whether you've got a different take on it.
I think all of it is relevant. I think the key thing for me is really, it's about that community. So is there, I mean, the tempo time, we looked into it initially. It's not something I've chased up yet because within this particular area, there wasn't a massive offer right now. So it's not something we're going to be picking up just yet. But one of the things that we haven't explored that I think there's definitely some relevance there is the joining up of other volunteer organizations, because of what I've seen is that obviously we've got an offer and we can do that for our own volunteers. But if we go to other volunteer organizations, groups, networks, they also have their own. And I think there's an element there of actually you could almost set your own collaborative approach up of having dynamic rewards, if you like. And I don't like to use the word incentives, but no, it is, I guess, but we have to be careful about the legal minefields of all this stuff, don't we? But ultimately, we feel like we need we want volunteers to feel like they're getting something for their efforts.
No, true.
Whether that's intrinsic, extrinsic, whatever that feels like. But we should really ask the volunteers as well. We have to, and one of the things that I like to try and do, and it'd be nice to build this into the system actually, as opposed to doing something external and adding to it, would be doing those pulse surveys, those snap surveys. Can we just get a quick survey from all active volunteers? What are your thoughts on this? And to be able to do that would be probably far more powerful than sort of an RN. Is that right or wrong?
Okay. You want to come back on that, Chris?
No, Tony's got a hand up, so I'm just aware of time and keen that she gets a chance to,
of course,
get her thoughts out.
Tony, please, thank you. What would you like to contribute to this? You're on mute at the moment, by the way. Sorry.
Okay, so yeah, in relation to this, in relation to rewards, will it include things like room to reward as well?
Potentially. I mean, that falls into this category of recognition for volunteers. We've had interaction in Room to Reward over the last 10 years. We think it's a great organisation. They are massively oversubscribed, and they have an awful lot of partners that work with them. If people aren't aware of Room to Reward, it's basically a group of hoteliers that come together. When they have empty rooms, they make them available for volunteers to have a nice night away somewhere, which sounds lovely, sounds great, but you can imagine there's quite high demand for them rooms. It's always something that's quite challenging. But it is another one of these incentive offers that, if used appropriately, is a really nice thing. If used inappropriately, it can become problematic. Jeff, I thought Jeff may have something to say on this, because this is very much Jeff's area of expertise over his years of studying this subject. Jeff, do you want to just jump in with your thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a danger that something like the Time Critics template scheme could change an altruistic relationship to one of exchange, where people are looking at what they're going to gain personally from the relationship and undermine values that are underpinning volunteering in the first place.
Yeah, I definitely agree. There is a risk of that, and I guess some of these things are happening anyway. Is kind of the thing. It's like the cat is out of the bag to some extent, and things are happening. So it's whether you sort of go along with them or you rail against them. And I think going along with them in the right way, with the right intention, is kind of the key. I don't know. It's very much up for debate.
Look, we'll try and explore it in the toolkit a little bit more, but no, it's definitely a kind of current area. The thing I think that's quite interesting about Tempo, and what it tells us about these things is that it can work quite well in area-based programs. So where you've got an area that is trying to champion volunteering on behalf of lots of different volunteering organizations there, you often get these with area-based passports where the CVS or the volunteer center are sort of running it. The Tempo model seems to work in that one of those central neutral partners, whether it's CVS or the local authority, sort of funds it, so it's free for everybody to use, and all of the participating organizations sort of sign up for it on the same basis. So the risk, if there is one there, about diluting volunteering is sort of shared and very clear across all of those partners. And you don't sort of maybe you can mitigate some of those risks that Jeff is talking about.
Keith? I guess not to keep. Oh, sorry, Keith. Just to move off to reward and recognition, because it is one of those sort of lightning rod topics. Based on the previous slide, is there anything people felt was missing that plays an important part of their day-to-day role as a volunteer manager that we've not included on that page? Sorry, Keith, to cut across you there.
Kind of related, and it might be something we've kind of touched on, but not. So I guess an answer to it, will it dilute? Will it conflict? I think it's been in tune. I think every volunteer has an objective, a reason they want to volunteer. And it may be that a lot of our younger volunteers will be in a role because they want to get experience so they can get qualified for a paid role. Yeah. So that's an objective for them, and I would say probably 70% in the certain role would achieve that with no problem within our volunteering system. And it's not something that we would say will guarantee your role, but based on your performance and the right type of candidate and person, that experience will underpin those characteristics of a swimming teacher role, should we say? And so you could argue, actually, is that not the same thing in terms of reward? And
I think what you're highlighting is it sort of suits some volunteer personas more than others. A very cause-led volunteer, I think probably, the prospect of reward within their journey probably would, take something away from it, to reduce it. But for the other types of volunteers, perhaps career-led ones that you might have described, it might be a helpful tool in the volunteer manager's journey. What I'm hoping to learn from doing a bit of a dive into Tempo is where their evaluation stats differ from other areas of volunteering. So they've got quite a lot of outputs on how much volunteering their volunteers do, what they particularly value about the experience, who they like to work with, that sort of thing. It'd be really interesting to compare that with some national benchmark data like time well spent to see if there are key differences in terms of impact and outcomes for volunteers in reward systems to others. If anybody's seen any research in that area, I'd love to see it. But we might be able to intuit some things from the national level. A couple of hands up. Stephen, were you next?
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to touch on Keith's point. It's something that I've thought about over the years, kind of where you draw that line, like you say, between volunteering, but where does an incentive become, borderline like a payment. But I think I happen to agree with everything. I've kind of come around to agreeing with Keith's outlook, because the more volunteer managers that I've spoken to over the years, and spoken to the volunteers, there's about hundreds of them, you know, there's always some kind of incentive. And like you say, it's whether it's, oh, this is going to help me get qualified, or whether it's going to help me get a job, or whether it's a theatre and it's like, oh, if I do this particular one, then I'll get to see the show afterwards if I'm volunteering. So there's always some kind of incentive. That's too much. So I think it depends. There is a line to be drawn. I'm not sure that line should be. Going back to Jeff's point, less concern, which I completely understand.
It's for volunteer managers to assess, I think, isn't it? We'll try and include some use cases in the toolkit, so people can start to see whether that might work or not. I mean, I'm fascinated that we've gone to recognition and reward so much here, really.
Yeah,
marketing, communications, inclusion and access, connecting with other sites, task allocation. Does anybody feel like they have digital needs in those areas? Before we move on to spot 3, Keith?
All of the above.
All of the above, right? Okay. I suppose as long as this list of 7 looks kind of appropriate for where we are right now. I mean, it might be, Chris. I'm sort of thinking ahead in terms of production and sort of updates to this, but this feels like the kind of section we could update with, you know, individual elements as more things come on stream.
Can I just add a little bit? Just
yeah,
sorry. One of the bits I wanted to say earlier on it, and it was quite interesting. I've met with my marketing team into treble figures probably over the last 2-3 years about what we want from marketing, and what have you. And it was culminated literally a week ago to did you want us to run this campaign? So knowing that they hadn't run a campaign since National Volunteer Week, they were saying, oh, we don't need to do one, you've got volunteers, blah 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 blah. And I'm like, let's just stop there. We've got a revolving door of volunteers based on the different expectations, roles, the paid work, students, you know, all sorts of things going on. So for me, we need to constantly advertise the various different roles, get those good news stories out, and connect with the various audiences and target certain roles at certain times of the year, because actually that's when they're going to be looking for those types of roles. You know, we know that's what the evidence is pointing to. So I think that whilst targeting the managers is very important, I think developing a module almost for marketing teams to support managers.
Okay.
These are some of the considerations as a volunteer manager need to take into account. Taking into account the marketing principles that you've got and your limitations as a marketing team. You need to understand each other.
Yeah,
and I think that could probably be transferable, couldn't it, to, you know, whether it's a management module for a CEO, understanding how they tie in and what, or for just what I mean. So, or for our board, I mean, we've got a board of 12 trustees, 12 volunteers, but actually to bring them back to a module training which would connect them to the work I'm doing on TeamKinetic would actually be really useful, because it would bring them into line and tune.
Lovely, thank you.
I think on that note, if people want an amazing set of resources for marketing volunteers, then the Toby Johnson session that the AVM ran. Toby's an American marketeer who specializes in volunteer engagement. Her session that she ran, that we sponsored a couple of months ago, was phenomenal, and those materials, I believe, are available to members of AVM, and we're going to be doing something with them and Gethyn in the new year. So watch this space.
Lovely. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. There was we need to focus on retention as well as recruitment. And this was the key message that came out of the last wave of the Nottingham Trent University research. They do a quarterly research dive into issues facing organisations in our sector. Volunteering is a big part of it, and it found that those organisations that had an equal focus on recruitment and retention, you know, keeping the audience, building the audience, working the audience in a marketing sense, were faring better. We're more likely to be holding on to their otherwise we're sort of, you know, you're filling the reservoir but there's a leak at the bottom and you're having to work so hard. It is indeed.
Okay, you hand up again.
Yeah, well, it's just with the changing of trends in volunteering, a lot of people are looking to recruit shorter time periods or micro volunteering. So I mean, I personally think digital definitely has a role in that. where you can have a lot of digital roles. So I wonder if it'd be worth including something in the digital toolkit about how to promote short-term micro-volunteering roles, where you can promote them.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks, Tony. That's great. Instinctively, I think we might be able to do something on that in the task allocation bit, which is focusing on those sort of smaller elements of volunteering. But thank you. It's a really good inclusion. Okay, great. I know we're sort of like getting towards the end. The third section is really short. So that's good news, isn't it? Everyone's going to have a cup of tea then. I'll go and pick up the kids. So let me move on to that very quickly. And then we will be in our final area. So part 3, becoming a digital Jedi in volunteering. This started out as a bit of a joke of mine, really, and it seems to have stuck. I don't know if Jedi is kind of quite the right term, but this is this section is about future focus, as we said, and it's really led by some of the big questions in digital right now and how they apply to volunteering. I don't think we're going to solve these issues or give you a definitive blueprint for how to deal with them. I'm not sure that's possible, but I'm sure, like me, many of you have been thinking about, well, what is this question of open data really, and how do we apply it to volunteering? I've seen how open data has revolutionized other sectors like banking. What would that look like if open data helped us to revolutionize volunteering? Could we really connect up all of our recruitment platforms seamlessly? That kind of goal. AI, of course, is the big one on everyone's list. I have seen some examples of where volunteer managers have started to use AI to do bits of their role, but it's probably just quite kind of complementary and not so fundamental at the moment. I'd love to hear if anybody's heard any examples or even used AI themselves in their own programs, but we're going to have a look at that. Passports and passporting, the issue that never kind of goes away, relates to open data very closely, actually, but we'll probably do something on that. And then finally, one area that's not here is something on adopting a growth mindset, which is very popular in digital innovations and people running digital businesses at the moment. We think there's something really interesting about this that we can help volunteer managers apply to their learning and their kind of leadership skill set, so to speak. So we're gonna probably try and explore that as well. And there's still time to shape this section. We're going to sit down in October with some thinkers in these areas, or some people that have had a bit of experience in some of these areas, and record some sort of podcast length resources. Like I said, not to really solve the issues, but to help volunteer managers approach them in a constructive way for them. So big questions in volunteering, this is all about. What should we tackle, as well as these or in addition to these? Would love to kind of like hear what you think.
If I can add a bit of context to Gethyn's piece there as well. These things are going to happen to us whether we like it or not, and we think as volunteer managers, you guys having some understanding of them and then being able to make the informed choice as to the ethics behind them and whether you want to use them and how you want to use them is really important. There's a lack of leadership in the sector right now around some of this stuff. There is some quite powerful organizations that are pushing this stuff out there whether we like it or not, so having some basic appreciation of what they are and what they mean and what they may mean to you, if nothing else out of the toolkit, if that's like our re-education piece that we can pass on to the sector, and we can start a conversation around the ethical use of these in our world. That's kind of, there's a little bit of that for me as well in the work that Gethyn has started to outline here. That these are amazing tools that can do amazing things, but are we quite sure we want them being used in a particular ways in our world, and is that appropriate in our world? Be it profiling volunteers to get their preferences, be it using chatbots rather than having a human interaction. There's a number of ways these things will start to pop up that we're thinking about as a company ourselves, but we want to be making sure that the sector is comfortable with that usage and it's appropriate.
That's a great point, Chris. And and AI particularly, in addition to where can we use it, where shouldn't we use it, or where don't we really want to use it in volunteering? There'll be a great question on that when we sit down to record, I'm sure. Some really nice stuff in the chat. Thank you, Tony. I'm really glad you're also a Star Wars fan. I mean, I think it's a generational thing. I don't know if my younger friends would be quite, but yeah, let's all become digital Jedis. Let's do that. Thanks ever so much for your supportive comments as well. Emily, and Annabelle. Yes, I mean, redrafting comms. I'm sure many of us are starting to use bits of AI as sort of personal assistant type functions. Doesn't seem like a big jump to start applying that into volunteering. Annabelle's talked about using it to redraft comms, make them more succinct and engaging, which feels like a sort of very typical use case at the moment. And I'm sure there will be others as well. Microsoft Copilot, I haven't used this. Good for giving ideas to writing role descriptions. Okay, that's interesting. Auto-generating opportunities within TeamKinetic might be a good one. Oh, right, okay. So something that assists the matching or the brokerage process. Is that what you're thinking, Stephen?
Yeah, I mean, it's something we've just been mentioned in meetings with. We always think we're always on the cutting edge of new technologies. What's in the pipeline, and would this be useful to integrate with our system? But obviously, AI is just on everyone's mind at the moment, and we use it here internally, within our organisation for different things.
Yeah.
But yeah, straight away once I say it, you think actually, yeah, that probably would. I don't know. I'm guessing, not being a volunteer manager, I couldn't say for sure. That could save
those sorts of things.
Time.
Okay.
But the developer will be cursing me now, saying, "What you mentioned that for?" I was going to be asking for it now. But
yeah, well, this is a lesson we all learn, Stephen. Eventually you get to an age where you realise don't have any brilliant ideas in case people expect you to implement them. Yeah, and that's welcome to our world. We're just at the end of time, I think, aren't we, Chris? Yeah. Can I leave you with one final slide in terms of the next steps and kind of what to do? I'm really grateful for everyone's involvement today and kind of contributions. I've taken quite a lot of notes, which will definitely help the final element, really. If you want to get involved, there is still a little bit of time. This QR code here, it sounds like you've had this link already at some point today, but if you want to sign up to hear about the launch for the toolkit, scan that, fill that short form in, and TeamKinetic will be in touch. If you've heard anything today where you think, oh, actually, I know of a resource that would be really great to include in this toolkit that we could signpost to, please do send it to us. We'd love to include it. The more, the merrier. If you've had a digital experience that relates to anything that we've talked about that you think would be a helpful lesson to pass on to others, again, please do get in touch. Even if we can just turn it into a short quote, I'm sure I can use it somewhere. If you fancy being interviewed, if you feel like you have, something that you can share with the sector on some of these big questions, we're still looking for people to maybe join those conversations. So if you feel like you want to become a digital Jedi, step forward, be brave, prepare your microphones, and we'll be in touch. And then, yes, the QR code is kind of on your right there. Otherwise, thanks ever so much.
Can I add one more to Gethyn?
Oh,
people
please.
here that not anti-digital, but maybe more
skeptical, or just
cautious. And they fancy being a critical friend to look at what we've written and offer us a counter argument to the points we're making, because it's all well and good being a digital evangelist and standing up here and telling you the world's gonna be amazing and there's no problems. That's where Facebook started, and that's not turned out so well for them. So we kind of don't want to be. We do think this stuff can be used for good, but we are open to having our ideas tested. And if anyone does fancy having a look at what we think we're going to put out there and giving us some feedback, giving us some critique, again, let us know. We fill in that form, and we'll be in touch with you. And we're open to the debate, if nothing else, if that makes sense.
No, thank you. That's a really good shout, and a nice place to end it possibly as well. Great, thank you ever so much for your time. I suppose I'll hand back over to hosts to close off.
Yep, thank you, Gethyn. I guess it's worth just mentioning the amount of research and work Gethyn's put into this to get us this far. So we're really chuffed that he's been working with us on this. I'm really proud of the content we've got so far. We can't wait for November to launch this thing officially. So watch this space. We'll be in touch. It won't be a full day. You'll be glad to know. It'll be something a bit more manageable, a bit more. I'm
going to read you the whole thing like an audio book.
Exactly.
And everyone to the end. Yeah.
Hopefully, it will be something in person, because these things are good, but there is limitations to digital. You can't be in the same room as each other. Although some people would avoid being in the same room as me sometimes, I'm sure. So thank you, Gethyn. Really appreciate the work you put in and sharing everything you've done. For everybody else that's been on the call today and made it to the end, well done. Someone asked about getting a certificate. I think they may have gone now, but I think you deserve one. So yes, if anyone wants a certificate for getting through today. We will get something out on the email to you. We do love a bit of feedback on the way the day's gone. Of course, it's a TeamKinetic conference. There's always technical issues. There's always something that doesn't quite go as it's supposed to. So we'd love to know what you thought about the day. If you thought it was too long, too short, the breaks are too long, all that kind of stuff. There is an evaluation form that's going to go out. We'd love you to fill that in and get your thoughts on that. We love feedback. We want to improve this day. I want to make sure we're doing something that adds value for you guys. If anyone wants to hang around and have a chat with us afterwards, we're going to be here for the next half hour. Thank you to all the speakers. Thank you to you guys for listening. And if we don't see you before, we'll see you this time next year. Thank you. Take care, guys.